Hey everyone, and thanks for joining. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes for everybody to trickle in and start coming in. Once it's 11 o'clock, we'll begin the presentation. Hey, everybody, and welcome to part two of Road to Retail. Just going to give it a couple more minutes for people to keep on coming in. So just sit tight and we'll be getting started shortly. All right, I think we will get started here. Thanks so much, everyone, for attending. And welcome to today's webinar, What a Retailer is Looking for from a Smaller Emerging Brand, Part 2, Presenting Your Brand and Proper Follow-Up. My name is Jordan Samuel, and I'll be the moderator for today. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the brand Evo Hemp and part of the Road to Retail team. I'm pleased to introduce one of today's speakers, Tracy Priest. Tracy is a 30-year veteran of the consumer packaged goods industry, rich with experience in both sales and marketing. Tracy held several sales positions at blue chip companies where he drove specific programs, increasing both market share and sales with large retailers in all classes of trade. For more than a decade, Tracy has owned and operated his own sales and trade marketing consulting firm, providing sales leadership with some of the most notable CPG companies and emerging brands. I'm also pleased to introduce our other speaker today, Bruce Montgomery. Bruce has been in commercial operation functions within consumer packaged goods firms for the majority of his 30-year career. He's served in executive leadership positions in marketing, sales business development, new product development, logistics, store brand and brand acquisition, and divestiture. He was part of the executive team that led the successful sale of Fleet Laboratories to private equity in 2015. Before I hand the mic over to Tracy and Bruce, I have a few housekeeping items to cover about this presentation. First, today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand after the live session, as well as a downloadable PDF of the presentation deck. Links will be sent to everyone who attended. Next, we'd love to hear from you during today's presentation. If you have any questions for our speakers, please feel free to submit them at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be sure to answer them at the end of today's session. If we don't get to your question during the webinar, we'll be sure to follow up after. And last, we'd like to encourage you to share today's webinar with your social networks. And without further ado, let's get started on Road to Retail. So first, I'd like to kick it to Bruce.
Thank you, Jordan. So thank you, everyone, for making the time to join us here this afternoon or morning, wherever you may be dialing in from. A super quick recap. Last week in part one, we really covered how to get that appointment with the buyer, and then we did how to prepare for your meeting. So right now we're going to step into the next topic, which is small brands and how do these buyers look at and determine viability of the small and emerging brands. And quickly, we spoke with a group of buyers representing probably 15 of the large retailers here in the country to get their perspective on what they're looking for with small and emerging brands. So a pretty darn good sample size. So one of the things we heard over and over is that the brand needs to work with a broker or sales agent that knows how to get things done within that particular retailer. If you have trouble getting an item set up or filling out new vendor item forms, all this stuff can be super tedious, but it's also critical. We had more than one retailer tell us that whether it's new items, new vendors, or programs like an invitation to participate in a holiday event have died because people couldn't get the paperwork done. So really critical you work with people that know their way around the individual accounts. Another key piece of information, and those of you that were on last week, you heard it a couple of times and you're going to hear it a couple of times today. Do not be needy. These retailers and their teams, like lots of places, you know, they've streamlined and combined functions. An admin or buyer or an assistant buyer just don't have the time to get on the phone with you multiple times and walk you through these forms. Again, don't be needy. Another thing that they look for is viability in these small brands, and that comes down to cash. Do you have the money to make it worth their while to bet on you? Funding is vital. Last week, we relayed an example where one very senior buyer made a small and emerging brand show them their balance sheet, that they actually had the cash on hand to execute the launch plan that they were being asked to believe and buy into. So don't be surprised. Never happened to me, but you know, this guy was quite serious that he's asked that on more than one occasion. They also want to see that you're committed to driving your marketing spend. They want to see that you're putting in place a demand plan that's going to move product through and off their shelves. Remember, there's two parts, right? There's these meetings, which is going to make your product available on the shelf, which is critical because you can't buy what's not there. But then you also have to have a demand plan to pull it through. That leads to the turn volume, which will ultimately lead to you being successful and achieving hurdles. Some of the metrics Tracy will get into later today. Be very careful holding your dry powder or delaying marketing. Even 10 years ago, people would not turn on their marketing until they had 60% ACV. But it depends who you're shipping to, because many of these retailers, again, Tracy will cover this, they start the clock when product is in their stores. So if you're waiting for 3 or 4 more accounts to cut you in before your start, you're really burning time. Retailers are also very interested in a small and emerging brand's supply chain. They've all been burned on more than one occasion where they buy into a story. They think the product looks good, tastes good, works well, depends what category you're in, right? But then their first order gets cut. I mean, that is potentially fatal to a brand, because think about it. If you're accepted into, say, 400 stores in a large retailer and you can only ship enough to populate 300 of those stores, what are the other 100 stores doing? When they reset their shelf, they have a gap. Gaps are bad because they can't make money. So they spread out what's on the shelf, and suddenly the aisle clerks, they might forget about you. Your product might be in the back, and it's super irritating to the buyer, and you can guarantee your phone will be ringing. Do not cut those first orders. Next is, does the leadership team of these small and emerging brands have credibility? Have they worked in the category before? Have they worked with this retailer before? Do they have a track record of success of being able to raise money to fund these new businesses? Again, you're asking these buyers to make a big bet. To you, it's about getting your product accepted and available in their stores. But just remember that every time these buyers accept you, they're making a decision not to accept something else, something that might be proven, or someone else who has an interesting idea, but your presentation or concept just happens to be better. And another thing, get involved with retailer programs when asked. Now, this is a bit of a double-edged sword, which again, Tracy will get into when we talk metrics, but you have to be careful because most retailers have an insatiable appetite for trade spending dollars. They'll spend every dollar you can offer. They'll take them. The problem is, some of these programs are really critical for a small and emerging brand to raise their hand and establish that level of partnership. So you know, you got to make decisions going in. Sometimes you'll have to play the long game and do a few things you might not really like, but stay ready and hang around the basket, because you will get a chance. But when it presents itself, you got to be ready to move. Tracy?
Yeah, great insight, Bruce. Couple things I wanted to add to this is one is when Bruce talked about marketing spend, he's talking about both consumer spending and trade spending. So don't think that spending money to reach the consumer is not important. Couple things that I also wanted to lob in as far as viability and getting set up with a retailer. So there's a lot of acronyms that are used: COI, EDI, a GTN number, a UPC. If you don't know what those things are, you need to work with, as Bruce said, a sales agency or broker to help you understand what those things are. The other thing about getting signed up with a retailer that's really important is they're going to ask you to sign a vendor agreement. I strongly urge you to make sure that before signing that agreement that you understand what you're signing, because in there's a lot of things that can trip you up and we'll get into this later in the presentation, but as far as returns and inventory and payment terms. So just make sure that you are, very aware of what you're, signing up for. So those are just a couple of insights that wanted to share with you. Jordan, you got anything on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think to both your points, getting a retailer-specific broker is super important sometimes. I've even had retailers come to me, tell me that they like the product. I've tried following up with them with no response. Then I hire the retailer specific broker. All of a sudden we're getting in process and we're getting everything taken care of. So it really does move the needle. And like Tracy was mentioning, they do kind of watch you to make sure that you're not over giving on what they're asking. So it also gives you some protection to make sure that it is going to be a successful partnership. And additionally, the funding is really critical. You have to make sure that once you're in these stores, you do have the capital to not only market the product, but to make sure that it isn't moving off shelf. So thank you guys for that. I just wanted to add those few points.
Yeah, Jordan, wouldn't you agree that a lot of brands that think that the Holy Grail is getting on the shelf, but it's actually getting the product in the consumer's basket?
100%. Everybody likes to celebrate when they get in a big retailer, but that's usually the starting point. That's a big success, but now a big burden. And so, like Tracy mentioned, you now have to, really focus on driving sales and getting it off the shelf. Because like Bruce said, the second it's in their store, they're going to be watching those sales. And if it's not moving quickly, they're going to trade you out with someone else.
Yeah, good insight.
Next slide, please.
Yeah. So I'm going to take this one, just talk a little bit about what buyers like to see in a presentation. Over and over again, I think it was 100% of the buyers said they prefer brevity. The days of bringing in a 40 to 70 page deck are over. So really they want it to be short. We recommend 7 to 10 pages. We've even had an example that a buyer gave us that the brand came in just with a 1-page sell sheet, but because the brand was so compelling, they accepted it right there, in the meeting. But again, be really concise and to the point, purposeful, and it's really a conversation. The best meetings that I have been in have really been, more of a dialogue than they have a presentation. Sometimes I've been in meetings where we don't even get to the presentation. We just do a show and tell of the brand. We tell, the founder tells the brand story, and then we may refer to the presentation, just as a reference point to pricing or whatever. So just again, conversation. I think again, some of the best meetings I've been in lately, before the virus, were ones where there was just lots of questions. So, the brand was asking, what are you looking for in new items? What are you, looking for in your category review. We'll get into what those objectives and strategies are later. But again, it's really a dialogue. And then again, the other thing we heard quite often was know your brand, know your ingredients, know your claims, backwards and forward. So I guess my best advice here is brevity, and then also listening more and asking lots of questions, and make sure that that it's a dialogue. Bruce, what's your insight here?
A few other things to add here. When Tracy talks about knowing your brand, one of the key things around your ingredients, again, depending upon what you're selling, is you could very well be asked for source of supply. Several years ago in the OTC space, you had to provide some documentation around where everything from your products came from the approved pharmaceutical ingredient to your bottles to everything. So depending upon where the world takes us, being able to articulate where your ingredients are coming from could be very important. Another thing is to have samples. You'd be surprised how many times when you go into a meeting, someone has a mock-up or a color photo. All that stuff's great, but what they really want is samples for a couple of reasons, especially a final sample with a scannable UPC. We've been told that sometimes buyers use that as a way to sort of test whether the idea is real or it's a concept. The times when you don't need a sample is if you are talking to a buyer from perhaps a unique class of trade like club or maybe dollar, and they know that you're entertaining the potential of making a SKU specific for that class of trade, something with a lower opening price point for dollar, or perhaps a larger SKU size if you're fortunate enough to be able to get something into club. The other couple of things is make sure you know what you want. For those of you that were on last week, one of the things that buyers told us when they come into a first meeting is they're surprised how many times they go through a meeting and the smaller emerging brand never really got to the point of what they want. I mean, like Jordan said, they want distribution. Are you asking for 7? Are you asking for 2? Are you just asking for a test? So, be clear on what you want. And then lastly, around the demand plan or marketing plan, one of the quotes we got, which I thought was pretty telling, is a buyer said, I need to see that you're committed to this launch being successful before you ask me to commit. So again, you got to be ready to move this product through and off their shelves. Jordan, before we go to the next page, anything to add here?
Yeah, I think those were both really great points that you guys touched on. And I would just agree with both of you and really want to hammer in, if you're flying out to meet with the buyer and they can have that presentation digitally and go through it themselves, that's really not going to be, or you really don't want to make it your focus of the presentation. You want to use this opportunity to build the relationship. And like Tracy and Bruce said, ask them questions, find out what they need, and figure out how you can make it a beneficial relationship for both parties. They're looking to really, like it says, partner with somebody who's going to ensure success for both angles. And so, that's really important to, again, build that relationship and express your passion for your brand, because the buyers can see that and they get behind companies that have that passion and have that drive. All right, let's go to the next slide, guys.
All right, presentation elements. Let me go through this a little bit. So these are the things that we're recommending, that are included in a presentation based on, the insights that we gained from our questionnaire that we did with the buyers. So category and consumer insights. So anything that you have around, if you've done focus groups, if you do have, data from another retailer that you're in to share, how you're doing there, I think that's important. If you're a little bit bigger brand, you may have some Nielsen or IRI or SPINS data, but that can be very expensive. So again, for small emerging brands, look at the data that you might have from your distributor or from, another retailer. I'll give you a great example. I had one brand that was selling really well online. So they shared their Amazon sales with the buyer, as well as the concentration around the retailer stores on where their consumers were buying the product on Amazon. Where did they live? So I thought that was really compelling. How is your brand different? We heard this, I think, from every single buyer that we talked to. They're looking for differentiation, not looking for me too items. So we highly recommend do a comparison chart, show your ingredients versus, the competition, whatever you want to show, but a comparison chart is really, I think, extremely helpful and impactful to a buyer. A go-to-market strategy. And so what we mean by that is that you want to explain to the buyer, what channel are you going after? What retail channel? Are you going to be only going in the natural channel? Are you doing, just food or food, drug, mass? Or are you only going after a specific? So they want to know that you've got a strategy to go to retail. They also want to know who your consumer target is. Is it an elderly, 55 plus consumer? Is it a millennial? So they want to know exactly what your strategy is. Some of the buyers told us that they love show and tell. If you've got a video you want to show, or you want to show some examples of your social media. Sometimes I've seen in presentations where the brand will share testimonials from their social media. And that tends to be, impactful as well. And then again, as we've, I think, beat this to the ground, but, how you're going to support the retailer and the distributor, we heard that again, I think, from 100% of the buyers that we interviewed. And then the other thing you want to include is your retail pricing. So MSRP, manufactured suggested retail price. Note that the buyer controls the pricing in his retail store. So you can certainly share what you're suggesting as a retail, but make no mistake that at the end of the day, they're going to dictate what the price is. And then if you want to include a pricing survey at the end, say, okay, I'm in these 4 retailers and this is what they're pricing at, I think that's really helpful. So those are the things that I think that we're recommending and what we heard from buyers on what should be, in a presentation. Bruce, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, a few things I'd like to just couple on top of what Tracy just said. When you get back up to category and consumer insights, we had several retailers, especially big ones, and one that would come to mind is Walmart. Only burn your time in your meeting talking about the category if you have something really unique or a unique take on it. Almost 100% of the buyer says, we know our category. I mean, we work here every day. And in some instances, in some categories, a place like Walmart's 40% of the category. But if you have a unique category or consumer insight, put people, it helps you articulate how your brand is going to drive their category performance. Remember, these buyers care an awful lot about their category performance and not so much about your brand performance. When you talk about why is your brand different, when Tracy talks about the comparison chart, that's a really good idea, especially if you drill in on where your product beats its potential competitive set on performance. Does it make you feel better faster? Is your taste preferred? Are you somewhat cheaper per dose? However you're going to cut those metrics, make sure that that comes through clearly. Again, we've talked about it and we'll keep talking about it. When you talk about your marketing materials, you have to prove that you're going to do all you can to create demand. Now, here's something to be careful about because, we're human and we want people to, like us or at least respect us. Be very careful if you show your buyer marketing materials and then say these very dangerous words. What do you think? Because they might tell you. And if they don't like your commercial or your packaging, are you really going to change it? Maybe you would if it's early enough in the process, but if all this stuff is already done, I would show them this and be very definitive in your language. Well, here's our final commercial. and kind of leave it at that. But when you add the words, what do you think? That's potentially dangerous. And I've made that mistake. I'm begging you guys not to make that. And then lastly, when it comes to trade support, this is really your opportunity to engage your buyer and get that person to roll up their sleeves and work with you and take on a little bit of shared ownership of the success or failure of your brand within that retailer, because this is where you really want their input in how to build a program at that retailer to help make your product successful. And you have that flexibility, you have the ability to say no, but what you want to do is shape it, because as we spoke last week, and we'll get into it further here today, thinking you can avoid trade spending is basically impossible. So really engage, come in with your idea of a plan based on what your broker has told you is important to these guys and what works, but be willing to listen and work with them. Again, if you can become someone that they believe wants to help them be successful and be a partner, you're going to get those phone calls that are opportunistic. Jordan?
Yeah, those are all really great points and definitely great takeaways. Those are all rules that I followed when we've been presenting to retailers. And I think, you know, two of the biggest points to hone in on there was, you know, with the buyers, they are looking for category performance. So you need to help them feel confident that you're going to not only ensure that the sales volume is going to be high, but that you are going to give them the promotions and the discounts that they need in order to have a success on their side, because ultimately they care about keeping their job, and you need to show them how that's going to happen through your selling your product. Additionally, like Bruce mentioned, you don't want to ask them their opinion on your packaging. Oftentimes, like as soon as you give them an opportunity to say, hey, we'd like it if you made this change, and then you say, yeah, we're doing that in the future, they'll say, well, we'll wait to bring it in until you've made that change. So you're giving them that opportunity for them to kind of pull out of the deal. So you don't want to give them any chance for that to occur. So you don't want to bring up any changes that you're doing in the future unless you already know that it's not going to occur, you know, that the deal's kind of dead right now.
Good point.
So yeah, just wanted to add that, but let's move on to the next section, metrics.
Okay, so this is a very key section because this is how the paper will be graded. And it's imperative that you understand these going in. Again, if you have experience with the individual retailer that you're talking to, and even better, if you have a relationship with that buyer, some of this stuff you'll already know. But if you're going into a new category or a retailer you haven't done business with before, again, it really pays to have that specialty sales agent that can handle a lot of these little things and questions for you. I want to come back and start this page with a comment we had last week. We had a buyer made a really interesting point. This person said, I really only manage and care about two things, my time and my space. Those are the only two things I'm not getting more of. And if you can help me maximize both of those, I will be very happy. So let's think about that. So you're going in with new items, and that person automatically needs you to present items that are going to increase the performance of their category. Otherwise, why would they invest the time? And the way they allocate hours in the store, depending upon the retailer, they're getting charged hours to redo their planogram in their category. And if they're selling something, I'm making these numbers up, folks, 4 pieces per store per week, and yours are only going to do 2, why are they going to make that trade unless your dollars are so much more? So you have to understand the velocity hurdles that you're asking them to do. The other thing that they'll talk about right here with time and space is they'll ask about your projection. And if you don't know what these hurdles are and your projection is lower than either what they're going to replace or their category hurdle, that'll bring many meetings to a stop right there. And that's all you're going to talk about for the rest of the time. So got to keep that in mind. One last thing on time and space. If you're fortunate and you have some distribution at a retailer, you go in for your line review. Let's say you have 2 items and you get 2 more. Okay, you go in 6 months later and you're thrilled because your sales are up 30%. But your buyer's not thrilled because he or she has increased your space by 100%. So you got to, again, it comes back to how is this paper being graded? Let's move into these bullet points now. Many buyers told us that they will share their margin requirements, their growth targets, if they have share requirements in their competitive set. Walgreens versus CVS might come to mind. But a lot of times they said, I'm glad to share, but you have to ask. And they said, it's amazing how many people never even ask what the hurdles are. Now, you can get at some of this through your IRI and Nielsen data. If there's nothing better for you to do, just get that product ranking report, count up the number of items, take that bottom 20% and draw the line. Everything below that line is at risk, okay? So you need to be doing at least better than that to have a shot. In terms of how much time before people worry, there are retailers that will knock you out of the set in as few as 90 days, and there's others that will leave you there for the whole year because they're not going to touch their set, but they'll know you're dead early. Almost every single buyer said, especially those that have had some experience and selling cycles under their belt, they said within 60 days, we know. We know if we have a dog or not. Very rarely does a brand get off to a horrible start and end up making it. You really need to understand, again, from last week, several buyers said never underestimate how much data we have and how good we are at reading it. So if you notice something bad in your performance data, whether in general or at a specific primary account that you have to win in, get on the phone and address it. Hoping that they don't notice isn't going to happen, okay? Proactively take that on. And this third sub-bullet here is really important. You know, there's always another brand waiting to take your place. And a lot of these retailers, that gives them a chance. They'll knock you out. They'll take them in. They'll take their slotting dollars. And as Jordan said, then the cycle just repeats. So very rarely will you find someone, a retailer, that's willing to hang in there with you. Other metrics. All these buyers are under the gun to quote unquote harvest trade dollars from their suppliers. It means you're going to buy into their programs, you're going to pay slotting, you're going to do some promotion quarterly, let's say, and they use the term buckets to fill. I have buckets to fill. I have a slotting bucket. Know that they're there, know that they're real, and understand how you can use that to your benefit or not. I mean, sometimes you may have a key competitor that's having a really tight year or something, and they're trying to be cheap on some of their trade spend. Again, without being foolish, that could give you a chance to raise your hand and step in there and fill that void. Most buyers are not going to negotiate price during a meeting. In terms of retail price, they want to know what their acquisition cost is from you. And as Tracy said, they'll take it from there. And then pricing and product specs, all this kind of stuff should be in the appendix of your presentation, because some buyers, one of the things they're graded on, and we'll talk about this in a bit, but one of them at certain retailers, it has to do with their investment of their inventory dollars, right? So they may get allocated X number of dollars to carry in their inventory. They're obviously going to invest the most money in their fastest turning items so that they don't have out of stocks, which is a missed sale. So they might be interested in having this information handy when you meet with them, but put it in the appendix. Tracy?
Yeah, great insight, Bruce. A couple of things that I wanted to just add is, one is on your marketing plan. Start that as soon as you know that your product is or brand is on the shelf. You don't want to, it's kind of a timing thing. You don't want to start too late where you're losing time and then you're getting, you're losing the performance that you need. So the best advice that we got from one of the buyers we talked to was, get out of the gate early, turn on your marketing as soon as you can, as soon as you know that the product is on the shelf, which you can see from your retailer specific data, and then really kick in that marketing. You really want to get started out of the gate quickly, whether that is your social media or maybe even a temporary price reduction with the retailer, whatever that is, but you really do want to get out and start your marketing plan right away. And then in regards to slotting, I know that This came up a few times in our survey, but just from our experience, we have run into brands who go into meetings thinking, well, I'm not going to pay slotting, or I know they're going to waive my slotting. Don't be naive that that's going to happen, because it's a lot of retailers charge that, whether it's in actual dollars per item or in a free fill. But today, most of the major retailers will charge you something to put the product on the shelf, because it's costing them money to place it there, and they're trying to cover their labor costs. So I guess our advice is, don't be naive and go in and say, well, I'm not going to do that, because there's probably a good chance that you are.
Hey, one other point I missed here that I'd like to add when it comes to metrics. Be cautious, folks, and again, for those of you that are veterans, you likely know this, but those of you that might be newer, this will be helpful. When you go in and talk with your buyer and they're going through metrics, you may be thinking in terms of all brand performance, but we had more than one buyer talk to us that they think in terms of individual items or SKUs. So while your brand may be doing okay and meeting hurdle, you may still have SKUs or items that are not. So if your brand's having a great year, don't be surprised if your buyer brings up the one or two items that are not cutting it. So just be aware that they're viewing it that way. Again, folks, it comes back to time and space. That bad item is taking up space that could be more productive. Jordan?
Yeah, I think those were all really great points. And like both Tracy and Bruce were mentioning, just about every retailer that you're going to work with or distributor is going to have intros, free fills, promotions, advertising that is essentially required in order to work with them. And it's really good to learn what those details are, so that you can ensure, A, that you can afford it, and B, that it'll still be a profitable venture for you long term. And again, like everyone was mentioning, please don't hesitate to ask the retailer what metrics they're looking for from your brand. If you don't know what they need, then you don't know how to really make those goals actionable. And so it's really something where you got to work with them, talk with them all the time, and make sure that you are going to be successful with them long term, or else, when you come to that category review, it won't be a great experience.
Absolutely.
All right, guys, oh, sorry. Anything else you guys wanted to add?
Nope. Next slide, please.
Yep. So again, Bruce mentioned this earlier, but shipping on time and in full is critical. I'll give you an example of a brand recently that got into a major mass retailer and was not able to fulfill all the orders, and it just, you're getting off to a bad start already with the buyer. And so we just can't emphasize the importance, of that as well. Another big one is understand the cost of failure, markdowns and returns. I mentioned earlier that there's a vendor agreement you're going to sign that's going to be required. There's also a guarantee of sale. So make no mistake that the retailer is going to take very, very little risk, if any at all. So if your product or brand is not selling, they're going to come to you and say, hey, I want to, mark this down and get rid of the inventory I have at retail, and then I'm going to ship all the rest of it back to you. So I'll give you an example. Walgreens, for example, they start their markdowns at 50% and then go from there. So it's just understand what the risks and the cost of failure, going into a meeting with a major, especially with a big major retailer. Buyers will not double down on a weak item. What we're trying to say here is that if the brand is not performing well, and you have a promotion coming up, you have an ad or a temporary price reduction or whatever, and they're still sitting on a lot of inventory, they're not going to load up the warehouse with more inventory to cover that promotion. They're going to use the inventory that they have on hand. And then again, importantly, and I think we've mentioned this before, but be prepared to discuss, your monthly and annual forecast. and also make sure that you can show how you got to those figures. But they're going to want to know, the buyer is, that you can support them and supply all of the product that they're going to need. And then again, bad news doesn't get better over time. So we strongly recommend that if you've got if there's issues on shipping, you're going to be late, you're going to be short, whatever it is, the best advice we can give you is to address those issues with either your buyer or category manager right away, as soon as possible. Bruce, what do you got to add?
That was really thorough. So just two quick things. When Tracy talks about a buyer not doubling down on a weak item, the key there is, as Tracy said, even if you have a promo scheduled, they're not going to load up their system. And it's actually a bit of a blessing for you, because remember what he just said about markdowns. You don't want some massive order going into a retailer where they then push out 8 pieces per store and it's just not turning. Because use that number he used as the Walgreens example. Do you want to get a bill for 50% off right away on a bad item? So again, you got to start working through that. And then an example on that last one, we had a new item that we had sold into Walmart. We were very excited, and we had a production delay of a couple weeks, and their new planogram was dropping, and we knew that we were going to leave them in a bind. We saw them at a trade show, and we put it on the table. Clearly they weren't happy, but after the fact, they said that they appreciated the candor. And aside from, getting some icy stares, they worked with us because we had a history of doing what we said we were going to do. And by playing that unfortunate incident with our cards up and being truthful, it ended up working in our favor. But again, address it head on. If there's no way to solve it, go tell the truth. Jordan?
Yeah, just to double down on what you were saying, Bruce, whenever you're seeing a problem or a bad metric and it's coming, it is definitely beneficial to be proactive, reach out to the buyer immediately, and work on a solution. What they don't want is to be surprised about a problem and you didn't notify them ahead of time if you had insight to that. And I promise I've worked through my fair share of issues with a number of different, vendors, and it's always come out, successfully. But that's through great communication and also, coming up with unique ideas in order to ensure success on their side.
Awesome. Next slide. So again, I think we've talked a lot about this throughout the presentation this morning, and just again, buyers care about their category performance, not your brand. So all buyers have a scorecard, and they're going to look at how your items are doing in the category. They're going to look at their category performance versus the marketplace. So a lot of times buyers will look at what other retailers are doing and making sure that they're getting their fair share. And then the small brands need to understand that the big brands, carry a big part of the weight. So they've got to be, successful as well. But again, here's a couple of quotes that we heard. Everybody we talked to, I think this was another 100%, said they're more than happy to share with you, what their goals are, what their KPIs are, what their category goals are. But the big thing I want to leave with you here is you've got to ask. They're not going to just open up and share all this with you. And that gets back to the whole premise that we've been sharing with you today. That is, they're looking for partners. So if they really know that you care about how they're compensated, what they're looking at, and then how your brand and products can help them achieve their goals, that's a win-win. And that's the kind of partnership that you want to establish with a buyer. Bruce, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, that pretty much covers it. If you get your detail from your broker that specializes in this account, or if you have experience, you'll know. But going into a meeting with a buyer, it is safe to assume that their compensation is some sort of formula based on the following things: sales growth in their category, margin growth at a minimum, holding margin in their category, their share of their category relative to head-to-head competitors. So think Target, Walmart, Walgreens, CVS. A lot of people are under the gun to grow their private label business. They have targets and buckets in terms of harvesting trade dollars. There are also certain participation goals that a buyer might have out of their supplier community, whether it's to get them into a new program that might be helping them prove how digital they are, or sometimes there's pet projects like managers meetings or golf tournaments. But these sorts of things, everyone may have to get 10 people from their supplier community to participate. Again, there's a chance to possibly raise your hand and score some points without committing a ton of dollars. And then lastly, how they allocate their inventory dollars if they're at a retailer that uses that as a rigid metric. Jordan?
Yeah, and I would just say, to tack on to that, like you both were saying, it's really category performance is going to be one of the biggest metrics that these buyers are looking for. And to go with that, when you're going into a presentation and you have your yearly review, it's always great to have some innovative products. That's going to show them that you're thinking about the category. You're going to give them something unique and, hopefully give them something that's going to drive customers going to their store. So offering exclusives is always a great way to try and create a special relationship with specific retailers. And again, just having new and innovative products on a continual basis that fit within your brand is key for, brand growth on a long-term basis. All right, on to next slide here.
Yeah, so this was really interesting. What do buyers dread about a meeting? Buyers hate the long decks. They think it indicates you're either not prepared or not confident. One gave the following quote. They said, "When I go in and there's a long deck, my vendor thinks, man, I'm really on my game, while I'm thinking, good grief, 50 more pages, where is my cyanide tablet?" So you gotta bear that in mind. They want the eye contact, they want questions, they want engagement. They said, if you're very, very nervous, they think it means you don't know your brand or you don't believe what you're asking them to consider doing. They don't like going deep in the weeds unless they have questions. So again, like we already talked about, if you have studies or claims or things about your ingredient, unless it's really critical that this ingredient in this product provides this consumer benefit and this point of differentiation, put it in the back. Put it in the back. Don't waste a lot of time telling people about the category. They know about it. If you have a really great point, make it. Don't read me the deck. I want to understand the opportunity and how it will serve my customers and help me grow my category. Again, coming back to that, they don't like lots of props and they don't like lots of notes that you're going through. They want to, again, have that conversation, and uniformly, they hate the slow reveal. So, maybe that looks great on, some old game show from 1965. They want the stuff on the table, whether you have a sample, you have an announcement that you have some, incredible person as your new celebrity spokesperson. Just put it right there. Don't go off your script. If this is a line review, don't start talking about new items. If you've been called in to address an issue like you cut your first order on new items, don't immediately start pushing them on your next new item. Have some humility and stay on script and address what you came to address. A couple of other points that the buyer said is they hate it when they go into a meeting and they know right away that they can't say yes. It also makes them very uncomfortable when they know early on in a meeting, just from the tone or the body language, that not only are they not going to be able to say yes, but this is probably going to cause somebody from the supplier to get a lot of negative blowback when the meeting's over. It doesn't make them feel good. I've been doing this a long time, and very rarely have I run into a buyer that I thought just enjoyed saying no and, you know, crushing the hopes and dreams of sales and marketing people. They're not that way. And then lastly, don't push buyers for answers that they don't have. You know, don't ask them what your sales will be. That's what they're counting on you. They'll say, look, man, I'm going to make this available, but it's going to come down to, are you shipping on time? Is your demand plan good? Does your product taste good or work well? You can do lots of things, and we've all done them, that'll drive really good trial. But then the product has to perform to drive that repeat, okay? That's all I have here. Tracy, anything to add?
Yeah, I wanted to give two examples too that kind of stood out to me when I was talking to these buyers. One is about the number of people to bring in. So one buyer gave me an example of a brand that brought in like 8 people, and the brand thought, oh, I'm doing the right thing because I'm showing them that I have all these people to support them. It was actually the opposite. So you only want to bring, if there's one buyer, you want to bring your sales agency or your broker and yourself. And then, if you want to bring the CEO, but you do not want to overwhelm the buyer with way too many people. It just doesn't work out well. And then the other thing on the last bullet point that Bruce had here about pushing for answers, a buyer that I talked to gave me an example of, they kept on asking the same question over and over again. What do you think my sales will be? What is my turns going to be? And they kept on saying, well, I'm not really sure yet. We don't know yet. We have to get started. And it really annoyed this buyer that they kept on asking the same question 4 or 5 times. And that's just not something that you really want to do. You want to be respectful, and they're looking for answers to those questions from you, not to them.
Hey, let me just build off Tracy's comment about the number of people, because it's really important. One thing that a buyer said that they found very irritating was if they go into a meeting and there's a lot more people than they expected. So remember last week, some of the coaching that these buyers offered was send just a quick email with an agenda and maybe a list of attendees and what their roles are, because we also had buyers say, look, you can bring 100 people if you want, but I'm leaving in 60 minutes. And there's a chance I'm going to be 10 minutes late, and there's a chance I'm going to have to leave 10 minutes early. So if we're going to burn 20 minutes introducing everybody, you're wasting your own time. Also, the people in the room should have a role, okay? And if you bring your CEO, make sure that man or woman knows what their role is, because if they go on and on about how they founded it and, when they were in high school, and, you're going to burn 30 minutes. Okay. So these buyers, it might be interesting. It might be entertaining. You're burning your time. And one other thing was, if there's a lot of people, confirm with the retailer that your meeting room is big enough, because a lot of these rooms, as you all know, are pretty small. So you start bringing 6 people plus a buyer and maybe his or her assistant, that's a full house. Jordan?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, and I know we're reiterating it, is don't just read the deck. Tracy can attest, we've attended a lot of meetings together. I've always given them a deck, and I have never read through it. If they have questions specific to the deck, I'll tell them to look at page X, but that's as much detail as I'll give. You really want to use that opportunity to have a great conversation, build the relationship. And to piggyback on what I was talking about in the last slide, you can even ask them what they need. A lot of times they'll tell you what innovations they're looking for in the category, and more or less tell you what products to create. And Ari and I have had a lot of great launches by working with retailers against what they need in order to, build the category as they see fit.
Good point. All right, next slide. We got one more. So follow up. This is, if I can say anything about everything we've shared today, this is where the rubber meets the road. It's all about the follow-up. The show is over, the meeting's over, you're excited, but you've got to do the follow-up. The buyer's going to be looking for, evaluating you on how good your follow-up is, because that tells them how good of a partner you're going to be. So the buyers we interviewed told us that we expect, follow-up within 48 hours. And in return, the buyers we talked to said, I will communicate back within 24 to 40 hours as well if I have follow-ups. So, and then another example, the buyer said, hey, we may not provide a deadline for responding because we want to see how you perform. So this is really, really critical to the success of getting your product, onto the retail shelves and into consumers' baskets, is follow up from, that meeting. And then paperwork can be very daunting. So definitely start right away as soon as you get the green light that your items have been accepted. If you need to hire somebody, do so. And as Bruce said early on in the presentation, don't be needy. They don't have time to answer all your questions. You have to know what you're doing, and you're gonna have to figure it out yourself. Bruce, what do you got?
Yeah, a couple of things here. So after all these years of attending these meetings with large retailers, the first question I ask once we leave the building and we're even walking to the car is, I will say, what did we learn? And I'm not necessarily talking about what did they say about our meeting and specific to our item or our brand or our launch. What did you hear? Because that's going to be critical. And what I mean by that, did your buyer say something along the lines of he or she is leaving the desk? So you might have to go back. Did you hear that there's going to be a strategy shift? Did you hear that their category just lost 4 feet to some other category? Did you hear that there's a ton of pressure on inventory? There's a lot of things. Are there policy changes? Did they change the drop for the new planogram? These are all things that will come up in the conversation that aren't necessarily right on to, are they going to take 2 or 3 of our items? So keep track of all those things. Next, I would say, use every meeting as a chance to sharpen the blade for your next one, whether it's a retailer or another one. Where did you stumble a little bit? Where did you get your questions where that buyer was maybe pushing you on, you weren't quite clear or you weren't quite specific enough? So use every single meeting as a gift to make your next one even better. In terms of follow-up, another thing that I always like to encourage the group to do is confirm in writing what you heard. So if there were decisions made, write them down. Hey, Frank, I heard that I owe you this by Tuesday the 15th, correct? And just get that. And it's not CYA to get it in writing. It's to get that buyer to acknowledge that, no, Bruce, it's the 18th, not the 15th. Get those little things that can be annoying, get them nailed down. And then lastly, and this is one none of us like to hear, buyers do not need to justify their decision. Okay, it's their time and it's their space, and it's our job to be clear, compelling, and understand how we're going to grow their categories. Jordan?
Yeah, no, those are all great topics to focus on. Like both of you mentioned, you want to make sure that you are timely in your response. They want to make sure that you are attentive and that you're going to be a good partner to work with. So don't go radio silent. Try and be as available as possible for these buyers. And then I think Bruce had a really good takeaway as well, is what did you learn from the meeting? It's really good to think back on what you did and didn't do well. There's certain meetings when I've had, misstepped on a sentence, and I knew that from one sentence I kind of, messed up and didn't get the deal. And, learned from that, improved, and, had successful meetings from there. So it's always really good to continue to learn and improve upon your meetings and your strategy, because you can always improve to make sure that you're going to have your next meeting is going to be more successful.
Okay, 2 more things I wanted to drop in here. One is make sure that you, in your correspondence back to the buyer, not only include your follow-up, but also kind of a meeting recap. Hey, this is what I heard. These are next steps. So that you're playing back what you, like Jordan said, you're playing back what you hear back to the buyer, so to make sure that you heard them correctly. And then I think the famous words that I've always been told is time kills all deals. So you've got to be very concise and follow up as soon as possible with the buyer with a meeting recap and next steps and follow-ups that you owe that buyer.
Absolutely.
So Jordan, do we have any questions from the audience, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey, everyone, I know we're getting close to noon here. If you have to leave, feel free. We will send you the recording after the presentation, but we will be running through the questions and running a little bit late, but we will try and get through all of them. First question that we have is, what retailer programs are most effective?
Tracy, you want to go first there, please?
Yeah, sure. So again, that really depends on the retailer. I will tell you that just from my experience, like demos, if you've got a product that you can demo, that is probably one of the most expensive programs that you can participate in. So while it probably gives you a good lift in sales, it can be a very expensive endeavor. But I do think that, and Bruce, maybe you'll disagree here, but I do think it's going to really vary by retailer and by class of trade on what works best.
No, I think Tracy's exactly right. Each retailer and each class of trade, things are going to perform differently. And it also depends upon what your objective is of the spend, right? If you're a brand new item, and let's say you're a snack, as Tracy said, a demo might be the best use of your money out there, because if people take it, taste it, like it, that's fantastic. The other thing you have to be aware of, again, as you're starting out, you don't want to set a dangerous precedent by agreeing to trade programs that are disastrous. But also, as a new brand, what you want to be doing is building your trade spend library. What did you do? How did it go? Keep track of it and make sure you're measuring your ROI based on incrementality and off of profit, not just your sales, because you don't keep every penny of every dollar you sell. You only keep your margin. But that's something, again, where a sales agent that knows a lot about, I'm picking something out of the sky, Target, would be able to coach you through what they've seen with other vendors.
Yeah.
All right, on to the next question, guys. Do you recommend purchasing category data from someone like Spins before attending a meeting?
I can take that one first, Tracy.
Sure.
If you can afford it, it is very helpful for a couple of reasons. Now, one, it is generally it's outrageously expensive, even if you buy a one-timer. However, it shows you're committed to understanding your category, and that you are making the investment to come in there with some real data. If you have a sister company, depending upon how you're organized, you may have access to some sort of data without violating licensing agreements. Depending upon whom your sales agent is, they may have access to data without violating agreements from IRI, Nielsen, or Spins. But if you can afford it, it's probably worth it. Tracy?
Yeah, I totally agree. It is expensive, but even if you can get a snapshot, it's going to tell you, what the competitors are doing. It can help you with your forecast to see, what movement is. So it really can, give you a lot of good insights, but it is expensive. So.
And I'll tell you right now, with all the confusion going on in the world right now, I bet you that the syndicated data folks might be quite open to some very aggressive pricing if you wanted a one-time snapshot, because everyone's going to have to figure out how to restart their either new business or revenue engines. So don't be shy calling and asking, because you'll never know if it's expensive or not till you ask.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, to echo on both of your points, the more data that you can provide in a meeting is always better, but it is very expensive. So sometimes you can use some alternative data. Some retailers provide their own internal data. So you don't always have to use spins if you can't afford it. And next question we have here is, how do I know how much to spend on trade spend?
Tracy?
Yeah, so there are, I guess, industry standards for that. Bruce, maybe you can comment on that, but it really depends on the brand, what the category is, what your expectations are for sales. But it typically is a percentage, of your sales. Bruce, maybe you can comment on, what
Yep.
would be a target. That's your area.
Yeah, so as Tracy was saying, in a lot of categories, there's sort of a baseline expectation. And again, asking your sales agent, or if you've been in the category at another company and you've moved companies, So in OTC, HBA, over-the-counter drugs and health and beauty aids, if you have a lot of head-to-head competition, you might be asked to spend up to 16%, so 16 cents on every revenue dollar. If you don't have a lot of head-to-head competition, maybe it's you and private label, you might be able to get away with 5, 6, 7%. In other categories, cookies, coffee's notorious, and a lot of the money spent in certain categories, it's not even really trade promotion in terms of getting your brand in front of people. It's buying down price points. I mean, I've seen promos in coffee where 36 cents of every revenue dollar is put back into price, or yellow tags, or quote unquote sales. But then you go to the coffee aisle and every single item is tagged. So are you really getting noticed? Don't know. So, but again, it's very dependent by category. It's dependent on retailer. There's some retailers that just want your lowest price every day, and they're not going to play those games. If you want, info@roadtoretail.co. If you have something more specific to ask us about your particular brand, or if our answer is insufficient, hit us there and we can get back to you, perhaps with a clarifying question or two, and try to give you a better answer. Next question, please, Jordan.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the next question, it is, what is an ACV?
Bruce, I'll let you take that one.
I didn't hear the question.
Oh.
What is an ACV?
ACV, all commodity volume. So the best way I've ever heard this described is two ways. So every category has a volume, right? Let's say it's 100. And in certain categories, Walmart might be doing 42% of the volume. So the math is a little more involved than this, but Walmart's doing 40% of the ACV. So all the laundry detergent sells $100, Walmart's doing 40 of it. Now, another way that I've heard ACV explained, which I found kind of funny, but it's always been useful, is when an individual chain like Walgreens talks about their ACV per store, they've got, gosh, I don't even know these days, over 9,000 stores, right? But
yeah.
a lot of them don't do a ton of volume. So they may have 4,000 stores that does 80% of the ACV. So in that instance, think of it this way, and this was the way an old manager explained it to me. He said, there's three, if you think of it this way, so instead of having 3 stores, you have 3 people in a lifeboat. 2 of them weigh 100 pounds each, and another guy weighs 300 pounds. So while they're all people, one is much heavier. So you have 3 stores, one that's in a fantastic location might be doing a ton of volume, and then you have 2 that don't do much volume. Where would you rather be? You'd rather be in the one store that matters rather than in the others.
Yeah, good.
That's my best answer.
Yeah,
and,
that's a good answer.
This next question, it's a little vague. So it asks, what's a hurdle? Not exactly sure what they're speaking to, but feel free to take the lead if you guys would like, or we can pass that along. And if they want to add more detail, they can do that as well.
Go ahead, Tracy.
Hurdle is really is a benchmark. So what, if a hurdle rate, an example would be, in my category, a good selling item moves 5 pieces per week per store. That's my hurdle rate for in my category for an item to do really, really well.
Yeah, and it's interesting, again, you have to understand your account because people have different hurdles. Some it's dollars, some it's units, some it's inventory turn. So you want to know the hurdle, but the bottom line about the hurdle, once you ask and understand, is they're making it or you're not.
Yeah.
Next.
Definitely. What are some of the best practices to calculate monthly and annual forecasts?
Bruce, I'll let you take.
Yeah, I'll take the
that
first shot. So what if it's an established business, what I liked to do would be I would take my unit volume on a rolling 12-month basis, right? And then that would be a number. And as I dropped off January from one year, I picked up January for the next. So I'd have that rolling 12-month. Why did I like that? Because if it's a seasonal item, the rolling 12-month removes the seasonality. And I would always use that. So I would do it in units because it takes dollars out of the equation. There's price increases. On a rare occasion, there might be a price decrease. And then I would run that unit by SKU and then multiply it by my factory dollars. And that would always be what I would challenge my group. That's my baseline. Now tell me why my marketing and sales plan is going to add or detract from that. But that's what I always found was the best for an established business. For a new business, you got to try to find a proxy. So if you're in a company that already makes, let's say, cookies, how have your last couple of launches gone? How has your distribution build gone? What accounts are you in? What's your store count? What's their hurdle rate? At a minimum, if it's a new item and you're into a store and let's say it's cookies and that hurdle is 5 pieces per store per week, you'd best be calculating your forecast at least 5 pieces per store per week. Or remember what we just talked about, that buyer's going to say, whoa, 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 Bruce, you're making a projection that's below hurdle? What are you doing? So that's why you have to know these things. But those are the two ways that I would approach it without knowing a little bit more specifically what you're asking. Tracy?
No, I think you covered it exactly the way I would have said that.
Okay.
So, good answer.
Yeah, next question we have here is, how do I find out a buyer's category goals?
You basically, that's easy. In the meeting, you ask. You've got to ask. So, and I think in every instance in our interviews, every buyer said they were more than willing to share that. But again, you have to ask.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that people feel, especially when you're a new brand, is that you need to go into a meeting knowing everything. You want to feel that you're buttoned up, you have all the answers, but it's honestly okay to ask. And it's really good to try and ask them those questions that they need, that they'll want you to ask in order to ensure that it's going to be successful at their store. And if you're not asking those questions, they're going to think it's honestly a little that you what they need to see from you. So don't feel scared and don't feel like you're, acting like a new brand by asking those questions.
So a couple of other.
The last question we have here today. Oh,
hey,
sorry, Bruce.
Let me add one thing there. So a couple of other ways that you might be able to get at that. And, don't do this too often or you'll get the reputation as a tire kicker, which will hurt you in the long term. But if you're trying to get into a new retailer and you've never been in there before, again, they will give you a list of 4 or 5 that do business in their category, so you could go in there and you could interview a couple of them and say, hey, we're going into Kroger for the first time ever. Can you coach me through how your approach would be if we were to hire you to represent? Okay, so they'll tell you a little bit about the hurdles, but as Tracy and Jordan said, all the buyers we talked to, no one said they keep that secret, but you do have to ask.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And to go into the last question of the day, if the buyer doesn't get back to me after 48 hours, how long should I wait before reaching back out?
I'll take that one. Well, you don't. So we have a philosophy: you want to be persistent, but you don't want to be a pest. So, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer there. What I would tell you is you don't want to be emailing the buyer every day. Hey, where's my information about whatever? So you want to be respectful, but you want to be persistent without being a pest. So, because in many instances, if you just continue to be a pest and pepper them with emails, which they get hundreds every day, you're basically going to piss them off or offend them, and then they're never going to respond. So I would just use, practical business etiquette, and but again, be persistent but not a pest.
Yeah, I think that's good counsel. And the other thing I would add is, if you are working with a specialty broker that specializes in that account, they very likely have other clients and they're in the building more often. A very specific example, we hired a firm to help us at CVS, and they did a great job for us. But one of the biggest benefits we reaped from that relationship was those people were in the CVS building every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, and we would be up there maybe 8 times a year. So if we needed an answer, they could either bump into them in the cafeteria, they'd bump into them in the lobby, they'd be in a meeting in the next office and just stick their head in. So that's another way to kind of get some mileage out of the people that are representing you. And as Tracy said, you don't want to be a pain in the butt, but you also don't want to be ignored. So that's a way to do it.
Absolutely.
Looks like we're getting some questions on the chat function, Jordan. I don't know if you want to spin through there. There's now 3 sitting there.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I'll pop those up as well. And just to piggyback on what Bruce and Tracy were saying, I think, going through your broker is a great strategy. They often, like you said, are with those buyers constantly. And sometimes buyers prefer to just talk directly to those brokers, so they don't have to respond to multiple emails. They can talk about 10 brands in one conversation. So that's a really great suggestion. And, for me, I tend to email them, once a week, and be patiently persistent in there. You don't want to be a nag, but you don't want them to forget about you. I've even been told by buyers, squeaky wheel gets the word. So sometimes, being that polite nag does get you to success, but you want to be very careful about how you strategize that. All right, on to the questions in the chat. First one we have here is, any advice on strategies to selling high quality CBD infused skincare products? Specific buyers to target. I'm planning to launch an online, but I would like to make it to the stores.
Yeah, I would say that is a great one to email us at info@Road to Retail. That is a great question, super hot topic, and a very complicated answer. So we'd love to talk to you.
Yeah.
So,
and I do have the person who reached out on that. So Monique, we will follow up with you after this presentation.
Perfect. Great question though. Next.
Next one we got is from Scott Harris. Something to consider: if you're waiting to see product on shelf before engaging your marketing plan, it's too late. Months and months ahead of time, depending on the retailer, and necessary to have on file and in the planner in order to get out the gate. Oh, sorry, that was just a comment, but definitely agree with that. You want to make sure that you have a very solid plan in place well ahead that does align with the retailer. So you want to start doing your research well in advance. Anything else you guys want to add to that?
No, totally. But we will send him his $50 for such a great comment. Thank you.
And last question we have here is from Lauren. Once you're on a retailer's shelf, how long do you have to perform or prove yourself as a brand? Until the next reset, 6 months, 1 year?
I'll go first there, Tracy. It really depends. From the input we got from the buyers, remember, they're watching from the moment they think that their stores are at critical mass in terms of knowing your item is at the shelf. We had a couple of buyers say 30, 33%. They didn't commit that in blood, but since a couple of them said that, that tells me that's sort of a bit of a trigger. Many retailers know that certain stores are slower to get to the shelf, so they might not start counting until day 30, maybe even 60. But like they said, very rarely does an item that gets off to a slow start after 60 days end up ultimately making it. Okay, so you're going to start getting phone calls in 60 days. We had a couple of retailers say they've knocked items out in as short as 90. And we had other retailers say, look, we know you're dead by 60 or 90, but I'm going to pay the money to go in for store hours to cut you out unless someone will pay it for you. But remember, you got to perform, because there is almost always another brand in every category with a checkbook willing to fork over those slotting dollars. And remember, again, time and space. If your brand is weak, you're wasting their time and costing them money because the space isn't performing. Tracy?
Yeah, I think the way I would answer that is, I think the bigger retailers like a Walmart, et cetera, are probably give new brands a shorter leash. But from what I heard from the buyers I talked to, 6 months, 9 months, if it's not looking good, they're going to call you. But they're going to give you, I think, a pretty good runway as an emerging brand to prove yourself. So, but it can be as little as 90 days, and it can be as long as a year.
Yeah, so that's a good point. We had a lot of the buyers said that the bigger brands have a shorter leash, but they also said they can't hang in there forever with small guys, hoping for a miracle or hoping you get traction. So again, I think it was Jordan who said constant communication. If you have a sales agent or a broker, make sure that person is always, in there finding out from the buyer, how's it going? And again, if you see something weird in your data, don't hope they don't see it, because they will. Go attack it head on. If you have a shipping error or a contract manufacturer snafu, deal with it head on. People will almost always forgive you at least once for honesty, but they won't, more than once becomes a pattern.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to do is, when you're starting in a new retailer, really watch those metrics and those numbers very closely. And if your sales aren't generating what your expectation is, you got to, immediately jump on it, offer coupons, promos, demos, anything that will be successful in order to drive trial and ultimately sale of that product. Because as soon as it's not performing as it should, like Bruce and Tracy have mentioned throughout the entire presentation, your clock is just going down. And if they don't see a spike in sales again, then you're just dead in the water. And even if they're not discoing you in that 90 days, they've essentially decided that they're going to be discoing you during the next review.
Right. So I know we're getting late on time. We might be able to take one, maybe two more questions, but if you have other questions, folks, please send them into info@roadtoretail.co, and I promise we will get back to you. Jordan, I've seen the numbers keep going up. You want to hit maybe one more before people have to start jumping?
Last question was just, will it be recorded? Yes, it's recorded, and yes, we will be sending it to you.
Okay, what about in the chat? That number's gone up.
Oh, that was just comments back and forth.
Okay. Well, PetSmart's reopening tomorrow, so I can get a haircut. So.
Yeah, and thank you everybody for attending today's
Thank you,
webinar.
everybody. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much. Hope it was worth your time. Have a good day.
Thank you too. Bye-bye.